Luffy represents the sun in One Piece. We all know that. However, that's only one fragment of the grander celestial tapestry that Oda has painted. See, the entire solar system is woven in through the key points of One Piece, with all the major celestial bodies, the sun, the earth, the moon, the planets, and so on, represented in some way by either characters or weapons. And once you piece together all the symbolic celestial bodies, the true core of the conflict of One Piece becomes clear. It all comes down to Luffy, Imu, the Gorosei, Blackbeard, and the ancient weapons. Today we're going to break down how these are the centerpieces of the final war of One Piece. So before we get into it, make sure to subscribe for more videos every week. And I want to shout out Surfshark VPN, the sponsor for this video. If you don't use a VPN when you're online, then you're missing out, because it's becoming more and more normal for pretty much everyone to use a VPN, as they allow you to access so much more content that would otherwise be region blocked for you in your area. See, with a VPN, I can change my location online to anywhere on the globe, meaning I can get free streaming on Netflix and other streaming services of movies, TV shows, and anime that are not free for streaming in the United States. You can check Surfshark's site right now to see their guide on what countries you can swap to get access to the best free movies and TV shows. Not to mention, VPNs completely hide my data, so nothing I'm doing online when I use a VPN can be tracked. Not even Surfshark can track me. So if you're not using a VPN, you can give it a try today. Since for my viewers, Surfshark is offering a deal for up to 3 additional months for free. Just go to surfshark.deal/Morge and use my promo code Morge to get 3 additional months of Surfshark VPN for free. Just hit the link in the description below, or just scan the QR code below. So that aside, to begin with, one of the most significant reveals in the story was the names of the Gorosei. Over 800 chapters after their introduction, Oda finally told us their actual names. And one of the main reasons he likely hid them in the first place was because their names revealed their actual level of importance in the story. For a long time, readers didn't know exactly how significant the Gorosei were supposed to be, whether they were even strong combatants at all, comparable to admirals and Yonko, whether they were just political figureheads or not, or whether they would play a part as endgame villains. But with the reveal of their names, their true significance suddenly becomes very clear. As it's not just the fact that they are titled godheads, it's the fact that they're each named after a planet. Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. These 5 planets aren't random. They are actually the 5 planets that were previously missing in One Piece's nomenclature. Because before the Gorosei, we already had 3 planets that were represented in the story: Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus. That's right, the ancient weapons. When we first learned about the ancient weapons, we were told that they were each named after the 3 outermost planets in the solar system. Pluton, named after the planet Pluto, Uranus, obviously named after the planet Uranus, and finally Poseidon, which is synonymous with Neptune, as the god Poseidon is synonymous and interchangeable with the god Neptune, which the planet itself is named after. Note that for the purposes of this video, I am going to be referring to Pluto as a planet because when Oda first started writing One Piece, Pluto was still considered a planet. Oda had no idea when he was introducing Pluton in Alabasta that one day the world's scientists would suddenly decide to remove Pluto as one of the 9 planets. So, looking at the original 9 planets, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, right off the bat when the ancient weapons were introduced, 3 of the 9 planets were officially symbolized and represented in the world of One Piece. Now at first this just seemed like a cool little thing that Oda did. He named the ancient weapons after some of the planets. That's interesting. But then we got deeper into the story and began to realize that Luffy is very explicitly meant to represent the sun. He is the one who will bring the dawn of the world. He is literally the embodiment of the sun god Nika. And so now with Luffy representing the sun, we begin to look at the solar system symbolism a bit more closely. If Luffy is the sun, then does someone else represent the moon? What about the earth? And right on cue, Oda then hit us with the reveal that the 5 Gorosei, who are now officially being confirmed to be far, far more important than initially portrayed, and are in fact shaping up to be absolute endgame villains, they are all named after the remaining planets in the solar system. Mercury representing Mercury, Venus Juro representing Venus, Mars representing Mars, Jupiter representing Jupiter, and Saturn representing Saturn. All of a sudden, the solar system is filling out very nicely. The protagonist is the sun. The 3 ancient weapons are named after the 3 outer planets. The 5 final subordinates of the final villain are named after 5 of the remaining planets. Oda is clearly saving the absolute most important pieces of his story for this celestial body symbolism. Only the most important factors in the final war, the very core of the conflict of One Piece, are being symbolized in the solar system. The 3 ancient weapons that have existed since the ancient kingdom, and the 5 elder stars who have ruled the world since possibly the Void Century, who must be dethroned in order for the world to be saved. And what that leaves us with is still 2 crucial missing pieces, the Earth itself and the Moon. Now there's 2 ways to look at this. One would be that Imu is the moon, as symbolically in fiction, the moon usually stands in contrast to the sun, representing the darkness that opposes the light. And in One Piece terms, it could also represent the night that stands in the way of Luffy bringing the dawn. After all, the world government's rule has been referred to as the quote-unquote darkness that covers the world. And Oda got pretty specific with his symbolism when he had Pedro explain that they are still waiting for the dawn to free them from this long night that they have been under for 800 years, referring to the world government. If Imu is the final villain, then Imu being represented by the moon could make a lot of sense. However, I believe it is more likely that Imu represents the Earth, and Blackbeard represents the moon. To begin with, this is because, unless there is some other key missing piece to the story of One Piece that we have not yet heard of, if Imu represented the moon, then there would be no character or ancient weapon left that could represent the Earth. Perhaps the Earth is not meant to be represented, as at the end of the day, the Earth is what everyone is fighting over, therefore maybe no one represents it yet. But there is in fact a strong case that Imu does currently represent the Earth, and that Blackbeard does currently represent the moon. To begin with, the point of Imu sitting on the empty throne is to establish the fact that across all of these centuries, there has in fact been one ruler of the world. The Earth has in fact been ruled by Imu this entire time. Imu is the heart of the world's government, and in that vein, Imu may represent the Earth, as he currently is the authority that has control over the Earth. However, the symbolism goes a lot deeper, reaching back to Skypiea. I expand on this idea in this video that you can click on in the top right, but there has long been an association in One Piece of an evil god that is represented by the land. During the Noland and Kolgara flashback, which is the first time that we ever even heard of the concept of the sun god, we were also introduced to the concept of other gods, such as the god of the rain and the god of the forest. But most importantly, we were introduced to the concept of the god of the land. This god of the land was the great snake god Jaya, literally named after the land itself. It was believed that this god had power over the land, and could actually manipulate the earth to punish non-believers. And the whole point of the Noland and Kolgara flashback was to show the Shandians that this supposed god of the land, this god of the earth that ruled over them, who they all submitted to and paid tribute to, was in fact a false god that they needed to free themselves from. Does this sound similar to Imu at all? The false god that rules the world that the people need to be freed from? And the further we go in Skypiea, the more that we can see of this relationship between the idea of an evil false god and the earth. Because in the modern day, Enel was the evil false god that ruled Skypiea. He was Imu before Imu, and the entire storyline of Skypiea was centered around Enel having taken control of the Verth, Skypiea's term for Earth, and hoarding it all for himself. Defeating the false god who ruled all the Verth in Skypiea essentially mirrors the broader storyline of One Piece of Luffy defeating the false god who rules the literal Earth, Imu. And lastly, a small point to consider with Imu representing the Earth is simply the fact that his 5 subordinates, the Gorosei, are all represented by the planets that surround the Earth. On either side of Earth, you have Mercury, Venus, and then Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn as the closest planets. It's a small detail that may mean nothing, but it is interesting to think that when picking the names of the ancient weapons, Oda specifically chose the outermost planets, and seemed to have delineated a line for the Gorosei being the innermost planets. Perhaps it was for symbolic consistency of having the 6 primary villains of the series, Imu and the Gorosei, grouped together, and then having the 3 ancient weapons as the most important items in the series grouped together. And so lastly, that brings us to Blackbeard, the moon. Now, even though the world government is characterized as the darkness in the series, Blackbeard very obviously and explicitly represents the darkness himself. I've talked about this more at length in this video about how the philosophies of One Piece are multifaceted, and there are really two types of darkness that symbolically must be fought against in the One Piece world. And as such, two types of darkness that contrast in different ways to Luffy, who represents the path of light. As such, either Imu or Blackbeard can be characterized as the darkness that opposes Luffy, the sun. However, since only one can specifically represent the moon, it feels like Blackbeard may fit the bill ever so slightly better. I mean, going all the way back to Blackbeard's childhood, what stands out the most is the specific choice of depicting him as a child looking up and crying at the moon. The imagery of the moon is clearly essential to Blackbeard's character, possibly in as important a sense as the sun is to Luffy's character. And continuing on this train, as the moon is usually associated with the night, we've learned that Blackbeard never sleeps at night. For Blackbeard, the night may as well be day. Even going back to Blackbeard's final battle with Ace, Blackbeard even spells out for us the idea that he represents the direct opposite of the sun, stating that the sun or the darkness, only one can win. Ultimately, we know that Blackbeard is the most clear and consistent contrast to Luffy, the sun, throughout the series, and taking into account all the associated imagery and symbolism with the character, I would say that Blackbeard is a bit more likely to represent the moon than even Imu. Though, in all fairness, one additional point to note is that Enel, again, the earliest depiction of a false evil god, was particularly obsessed with the moon, believing that the moon was fitting for a god. So the idea that Imu may in fact represent the moon as the final villain of the story, the one who has cast the world into a long night for 800 years and so on, may still hold merit, and Blackbeard may ultimately not be represented at all in the cosmic scheme of things. However, Blackbeard does seem to be shaping up to be a comparably important villain to Imu in the final conflict. So at the moment, I would argue that Blackbeard does complete the picture very neatly as the moon. Because taking a step back, what we can see is the entire final conflict of One Piece painted out for us among the stars. The hero, the one who will bring the light and the dawn to the world, Luffy, represented by the sun. The villain who walks a dark but parallel path to the hero, Blackbeard, represented by the moon. The final villain who controls the earth that everyone is fighting for, Imu, represented by the earth itself. The 5 key servants of the final villain who must be defeated as well, represented by the 5 planets closest to Earth. Valkyrie represented by Mercury, Venus Juro by Venus, Mars by Mars, Jupiter by Jupiter, and Saturn by Saturn. And finally, the 3 ancient weapons that have been sought after for centuries, that have been the driving force of so much of One Piece's narrative so far. The weapons that may be the keys to who wins the final battle, represented by the remaining outermost planets: Uranus, Neptune, aka Poseidon, and Pluton. The entire final war, the centerpieces of it all, are represented in the solar system. Looking at this, you can see what is the core, most important pieces at the heart of the One Piece conflict right here. So let me know if you think anyone else should have been represented by one of the celestial bodies in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like and subscribe. And you can get my extended thoughts on what these respective planetary symbols suggest for the future of each of these characters and weapons on my Extended Thoughts podcast by supporting me on Patreon, link in the description below. And remember to get up to 3 additional months of Surfshark VPN for free by using my promo code MORGE. Just hit the link in the description below. Or just scan the QR code below.